This video will eventually become outdated. Please check the iCards and description below for a revised video if one exists, and the comments for any small revisions. 10 years ago, if you pulled a random Trekkie off the street and told them you had never seen Star Trek, wanted to watch it all, but didn't know where to start, you would have gotten pretty much the same answer from everybody. In 2013, Star Trek as a televised series had been dead for nearly a decade, and it already abandoned its original timeline in favor of a rebooted universe. With two fairly independent shows set in the 22nd and 23rd centuries, and a trio of shows set in the 24th, a natural order presented itself. The only real point of confusion or disagreement would probably be when to watch the 4 Next Generation movies. But in 2017, televised Star Trek returned to its original universe, the Prime Timeline, in a big way. For in its absence, the streaming wars had started, with every company vying for their own large IP to constantly keep subscribers paying. And Marvel's Avengers was making incredibly expansive cinematic universes the norm, if not the expectation. So today's Star Trek sees 9 pretty unique shows, at least 8 of which are in some form of active production, with 5 currently airing. And if that wasn't complicated enough, these shows sprinkle themselves throughout the timeline, serving as prequels to some, sequels to others, both, or just feature completely independent events that overlap in time. All this culminates in a watch order for modern Star Trek not being the straightforward line of the classics, but more of an open-ended web of some series building off previous ones. Therefore, in this video, I choose to interpret the question, what order should I watch Star Trek in, with 3 assumptions. Firstly, that your goal is to watch the entirety of Star Trek. If it's not, this is why my videos have chapters. Secondly, that whenever possible, you want to avoid spoilers of any kind during your watch-through. So if Person A dies in The Next Generation, and that death is referenced by Discovery, you would not want to watch Discovery before TNG. Equally, if the TNG character Captain Picard shows up in a series that takes place after TNG, such as, I don't know, Star Trek Picard, you would want to watch TNG before Picard, as that character's presence in the later show would mean they can never really be in any danger at any point in TNG. And don't worry, that's gonna be the only spoiler in the video. Look, they literally called the show Star Trek Picard. What am I supposed to do? And finally, and this is probably the most important assumption, so wake up, you in the back, I assume you want to get as much out of every show as possible. Well, that's an inherently subjective goal. In practice, this mostly pertains to stories or arcs which happen across multiple shows, as well as information that is provided in show A to be built upon in show B. For these and countless other little reasons, I recommend watching the classic Star Trek shows, those being everything before the 2009 Reboot movie, before any of the modern ones we'll be talking about today. I partially discuss why in my video on a classic watch order guide, which serves as part 1 to this series. But for all of you eager or impatient to wade through the 736 installments of classic Trek, don't worry, because I won't make the assumption that you've seen that video or any of the classics. Instead, I will specifically highlight when a classic Star Trek series is particularly relevant or even critical to a modern Star Trek series, in a spoiler-free way, of course. I'll similarly highlight when the events of a modern show will spoil those of a classic series. So, without further ado, let's get started with the modern Star Trek series, in the order of their first episode's premiere date.
Space. The final frontier.
These are the voyages of the starship
Enterprise. Its continuing mission
to explore strange new worlds,
to seek out new life
and new civilizations,
to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Until now, we have focused on just one of Star Trek's 3 main timelines. Every other show, past and future, takes place in what's called the Prime Timeline. These shows also occasionally venture into the Mirror Universe, the second main universe, but it's not necessary to directly discuss and is already accounted for in these recommendations. However, the previous 3 movies take place in what's called the Kelvin Timeline, or sometimes JJ-verse if you're old-fashioned like me. The reason behind the first name becoming self-evident during the first movie, and the latter being a reference to the director of the first two films, J.J. Abrams. 2009 Star Trek, or Star Trek 2009 as it's commonly referred to, was an attempt to reboot the dead Star Trek franchise for modern audiences. Therefore, it was decided to set this movie in a new, alternate timeline, which is why what I'm about to say is going to sound weird. Even though these movies take place between the years of Discovery and TOS in an alternate universe, it makes the most sense to consider them taking place during the year 2387 of the Prime timeline, between Prodigy and Picard. Without spoilers, you're just gonna have to kinda trust me on this, but generically, the reason is that the events of the film are not totally isolated from the Prime timeline, and this is a handy watch order tool. While you could simply have this be your first Star Trek, the feel of it is somewhere between the classic series and new ones, which makes it a natural transition point between the two, which is why I recommend watching this movie, Into Darkness and Beyond, first after classic Trek. Additionally, without spoilers as to why, the original series, the animated series, the first 6 movies, and the Next Generation would provide additional context to the film and one of its main characters. This would also avoid retroactive spoilers from watching this trilogy before the classics, but I won't make it a hard recommendation.
The only way to defeat fear is to tell it no. No. We will not take shortcuts on the path to righteousness. No. We will not break the rules that protect us from our basest instincts. No. We will not allow desperation to destroy moral authority.
2017's Star Trek Discovery was the first show to be produced by Alex Kurtzman and Secret Hideout, who manage the franchise to this day. The show begins in the 23rd century, a decade before the original series, and acts as a sort of flagship for the franchise, with many of the later shows being either seeded or direct spin-offs of Discovery. This has the unfortunate side effect of making Discovery the most complex show for this guide, but I promise it gets much easier from here. Discovery is also the first Star Trek series to fully embrace a serialized structure, each season dealing with some threat or mystery that is both introduced and resolved in that season. But, of course, there are still multi-season arcs and other developments to keep the seasons connected. Being both a prequel to all but one of the other series, and the first Prime Timeline Star Trek in 11 years, Discovery doesn't rely on the viewer having any knowledge from the classic shows. The show does contain references to names and events from other shows, but not in any substantial way. Because of this, Star Trek Discovery serves as an excellent introduction to modern Star Trek. However, there are some very important things to know before going in. Firstly, is the existence of the short treks. This was a somewhat experimental series that only produced 10 very short episodes before being killed by lockdowns. I bring this series up now because 9 of the 10 episodes take place during the Discovery era, and many of them are relevant to either the plot or characters from Discovery. In fact, if you skip short treks like I originally did, you'll eventually find yourself totally confused by a previously on showing characters and events you've never seen. As such, Discovery and short treks should be treated as a package deal and watched together. As for the order, I think it's simplest to watch them as they aired, which is the first season of Discovery, the short treks Runaway, Calypso, The Brightest Star, and Escape Artist, the second season of Discovery, then the remaining short treks other than Children of Mars, which I'll get to later in the video. And one final note about Discovery is that the first 2 seasons are drastically different from the remaining seasons. Why is firmly in the realm of spoilers, but I want to bring this up now because early Discovery has a lot of common problems and criticism that season 3 and onwards doesn't have. Usually this has to do with the quality of the show as a Star Trek rather than as a show in its own right, but I want to encourage people like me, who found the first 2 seasons an absolute slog, that a much improved show comes afterwards, which at its best has brought tears to my eyes. While I discourage skipping ahead to season 3 due to countless plot points and character developments, I would strongly encourage any skeptics and even haters to give the show a 3-season chance. For related reasons, I believe that both Star Trek 2009 and Picard's first season become requirements after Discovery's second season. The 2009 movie will provide some extra context around some central species in that season, while Picard provides some additional context. This context isn't really critical. However, Discovery's fourth season does contain a minor spoiler regarding the resolution of Picard's first season, so this works out nicely. The space between Discovery's second and third seasons comes as a natural jumping off point to make detours into some of the other series if you wish, making this web a bit neater. Now, time for something easier.
But the Federation understood there were millions of lives at stake.
Romulan lives.
No. Lives.
As we continue through the list of modern shows, it's important to note that each show is designed to feel distinct, with each series catering to a different genre or audience. Star Trek Picard is the series' self-described adult drama, taking place as the 24th century becomes the 25th. Picard is a serialized show in the same vein as Discovery, but following the events of the Next Generation's Captain Jean-Luc Picard, 20 years after his last appearance in Nemesis, or 16 years after the start of Prodigy, the previous show chronologically. Given what I've just said, you probably wouldn't be surprised to learn that Picard is arguably the series that requires the most homework, so get comfortable. You probably think that given the show is literally called Star Trek Picard, that it would be important to watch The Next Generation before starting Picard. But you'd be mistaken. It's critical. You see, the first season of Picard acts as a direct sequel to the final TNG movie, Nemesis. If you watch Picard before Nemesis, you will spoil one of the biggest and most impactful moments in Star Trek history. And beyond that, it will probably affect how you view The Next Generation. And right now, if you don't care, then trust me, if you manage to watch all of the modern shows, you are going to want to go back and watch the classics. So if you haven't already, go watch The Next Generation and its 4 movies before starting Picard. Somewhat surprisingly, Voyager falls in the same boat for similar reasons. And if you've seen my guide on the classic Star Treks, you'll know I recommend Deep Space Nine is a prerequisite for half of what I've just listed. While DS9 isn't a requirement for Picard, it is a fantastic show that shares a lot with modern Star Trek. Editing Nathan here with the perils of creating a watch order guide for a show in active development. Picard's third season has started airing since I recorded this footage. In fact, it's almost done, and I'm gonna go ahead and change what I just said and say Deep Space Nine is absolutely now a hard requirement for Picard. It's great, you should watch it anyway, but now it's required. Finally, someone did it. I would also recommend watching the 2009 Reboot movie before Picard. While it may seem strange that the alternate timeline would contain anything relevant to Picard, which like every show takes place in the prime timeline, that movie actually sets the stage for the first season. You see, in the immortal words of River Song,
spoilers,
and in the immortal words of the 12th Doctor,
A thing happened.
and Picard happens to not only be the first show that takes place after said thing, but directly deals with it. You get all the background info you need in the first episode of Picard, but it's still sort of a backwards order. And finally, with that out of the way, there's another bit of homework in that short trek we set aside earlier. Children of Mars is the final short trek and acts as a direct prequel to Picard. So much so that the short trek's Blu-ray doesn't even include it. Instead, it's only available as a special feature on the Blu-ray for Picard's first season. Suffice it to say, Children of Mars is one of those things best to go into blind. And starting Picard beforehand, as unfortunately I did through ignorance, will greatly diminish the story. It's not really required for Picard, but it requires Picard to come after. It's also less than 7 minutes long, meaning you could have watched it twice in the time it's taking you to watch this much of the video.
First Contact is a delicate, high-stakes operation of diplomacy. One must be ready for anything when humanity is interacting with an alien race for the first time. But we don't do that. Our specialty is Second Contact.
Star Trek Lower Decks is an animated workplace comedy, directly continuing the 24th century block of The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, beginning 1 year after Nemesis. Returning to the classic episodic format, the show centers around the ensigns of the distinctly insignificant USS Cerritos. Lower Decks originally sold itself as a very fan-pleasing show, with each episode featuring countless references to the previous shows, cameos from the previous characters and longtime franchise actors, and even revisits the plots from previous episodes. Lower Decks probably best emphasizes what I mean when I said getting the most out of each series, as I'd consider the entirety of classic Star Trek to be a prerequisite for the show. There are so many huge moments, surprise appearances, and references to not just the shows that came before, but to general Trek culture and fandom. And yet, the fact that I've seen so many testimonials from people who have never seen a Star Trek besides Lower Decks and absolutely loved it is a testimony to the strength of the show's original characters and stories. Somewhat surprisingly, Lower Decks seems to shy away from references to the modern series, so it also serves as a great introduction to the modern era. Likewise, if you really need something to get you hooked enough to go back and watch the older shows, then it's a good place to look too. Lower Decks perfectly captures the hope and optimism that makes this franchise great, as well as the general feel and look of the classic shows.
When the Federation first formed, it wasn't pretty. A collection of species, entirely unfamiliar to each other. Different languages, different cultures, but with one shared aspiration: to be better. I've seen my share of wayward crews, and I can tell you this: you've got potential.
Star Trek Prodigy is a CGI animated show created in partnership with Nickelodeon geared towards kids. And stop right there, because if you just went to skip to the Strange New World section at the words geared towards kids, then you're making a huge mistake. Beginning in the year 2383, a year after the events of Lower Decks' third season and 16 years before Picard, Prodigy follows a group of disenfranchised misfit kids ranging from 8 to 17 years old. These kids discover a mysteriously abandoned starship from a distant and unknown organization known as the United Federation of Planets, and the series centers around their discovery of Starfleet ideals and Federation principles. Children's television has changed a lot in the past decade or so, with many shows being written no differently than those aimed at older audiences. Shows such as Cartoon Network's Steven Universe have shown us very adult topics can be handled brilliantly and engagingly in the medium of a kid's cartoon. That show, fundamentally and explicitly, being about the aftermath of a rebel leader who saved Earth through a horrendous war crime, and the burdens her child Steven has to carry, both living with that fact and the expectation his mother's old friends have of him to be like her. And if you still think being a kid's show automatically removes all value from Prodigy, then might I remind you that for most of its existence, Doctor Who has been considered by many to be a children's show. And will both me and my episode review audience agree there is some nebulously defined bar the show isn't crossing that is putting a ceiling on its quality, that ceiling is still very high and producing a great show. So far, Prodigy's 20-episode first season has produced engaging, thought-out, satisfying, and beautiful stories that enrich the Star Trek universe. And also time them up. So getting back to the topic at hand, the prerequisites for Prodigy are interesting. Both in my previous video and until the last episode of Season 1 aired, I listed Voyager as a firm prerequisite for Prodigy. These are the only two shows to take place in the Delta Quadrant, which for our purposes is the other side of the galaxy from Federation space and historically inaccessible to Federation starships. The show also touches on the lives of a few Voyager characters after the events of that series, and features a holographic emergency training program of Voyager's Captain Janeway as a part of the main cast. However, the core goal of Prodigy has always been to introduce Star Trek, and more broadly the ideals and values at its core, to the next generation of children. As such, while it can build off other series, it fundamentally cannot rely on the viewer having any knowledge from anything except its own episodes. So in retrospect, with the first season having recently concluded, I can see a value and even engagement in treating Voyager as a prequel to Prodigy. So while there are certainly arguments for Prodigy after Voyager, and later seasons could very well change my opinion, I would say Prodigy can be watched straight out of the gate as an introduction to the franchise as a whole. In fact, I would even recommend it over Lower Decks as an introduction to the series, as, well, that's exactly what it's designed to be, and it does so without the same degree or frequency of retroactive spoilers.
No matter how many stars there are in the sky, no matter how many galaxies swirl beyond our own, no matter what the mathematical probabilities or the number of times we say we are not alone in the universe, our first visit from the stars is always the province of children's stories and science fiction. First contact with aliens always lives squarely in the impossible. First contact is just a dream until one day it isn't.
In early May of 1964, a man by the name of Gene Roddenberry met with executives of NBC to pitch his idea for a new science fiction series. A show about a utopian humanity in the far future, exploring strange new worlds in search of alien life while boldly exploring moral topics and issues of the day through the species they encounter. After eventually getting greenlit to produce a pilot, Roddenberry set to work. The result was an episode about the crew of the USS Enterprise, centering around 3 leads: an older and well-decorated captain by the name of Christopher Pike, a capable female first officer only referred to as Number 1, and an emotionless and highly logical half-human, half-alien by the name of Spock. The executives at NBC were incredibly impressed by the production value and generally positive about what was written, but wanted more action and adventure to attract a wider audience. As a result, they commissioned a second pilot. The Enterprise was kept, as with the character of Spock, but Captain Pike was replaced by a much younger and action-oriented Captain James T. Kirk, while a female first officer was seen as far too radical a notion for the network to air. This version of Star Trek went on to be the one we know today, with footage from the original pilot being reused in a 2-parter to establish those events as both canon and taking place about 11 years before the new series began. And the rest, as they say, is history. Fast forward 50 years, and you have Star Trek Discovery exploring major events just a year after this pilot is set. So when it came for that crew to meet the crew of the Enterprise, it wasn't Kirk, Spock, and McCoy that stepped out of the airlock, but Pike, the now named First Officer Una, and, well, Spock, so I guess they did meet him. Fan reaction to Captain Pike was overwhelmingly positive, with instant cries and petitions for a series centered around his Enterprise. And it wasn't long until that show was commissioned. Star Trek Strange New Worlds is a look at what could have been. The original series, it is a classic episodic show with modern serialized characters. Beginning a year after the events of Discovery's second season, or 7 years before Kirk's 5-year mission in the original series, the show really is a modern TOS in pretty much every way and has found praise from critics and fans alike. As for a watch order, Strange New Worlds is again interesting. As I've said, many of the characters in Strange New Worlds were introduced in Discovery's second season. Notably, Spock has gone through a significant character arc, and Pike was in the middle of one. But Pike's arc is unusual in that it has become my favorite multi-series arc that doesn't really have a correct or proper order. It involves episodes from the original pilot, the original series, Discovery, and of course, Strange New Worlds. So, while you could certainly watch TOS beforehand and gain extra enjoyment and meaning out of Strange New Worlds, I don't believe it's required, especially as nearly everything else in Strange New Worlds serves as a prequel to TOS. As for Discovery, I would strongly recommend finishing that show's second season before watching Strange New Worlds. While everything you need to know from Discovery is explained to you in the first episode of Strange New Worlds, it's the difference between experiencing a show and having a general summary being read to you in Spock's emotionless monotone. The two crews haven't interacted since the second season of Discovery and are extremely unlikely to do so again. So this acts as a clean transition between the two shows. One final note is that, while unaired, it has been announced that Strange New Worlds' second season will feature a crossover episode with Lower Decks. And while The Next Generation has several Deep Space Nine crossover scenes that work perfectly fine, having not seen Deep Space Nine, it's not entirely unlikely that Lower Decks will become a prerequisite for Strange New Worlds. This is something that I'll definitely put in the comments once the episode airs, along with any other small revisions that crop up between now and my next revision of this video.
The Vulcan Science Directorate has studied the question of time travel in great detail. They found no evidence that it exists, or that it can exist.
And that's everything for currently produced modern Star Trek. But we're not done yet, for we know of 3 additional unaired but officially confirmed Star Trek series, which we know enough about to discuss where they will eventually land in this flowchart of a guide we've been building. So without further ado, let's begin.
Article 14, Section 31. There are a few lines that make allowances for bending the rules during times of extraordinary threat.
Editing Nathan here with one last thing. Please ignore the fact I probably sound sicker than last time. Section 31 is a movie now, no longer a show. But everything else is the same. This episode comes out this week, so finally, they're not gonna change anything from under me.
Untitled Section 31 show, great name by the way, I really think they should keep it, will be a series almost certainly set concurrently or around the same time as Strange New Worlds, and will center around certain characters from Discovery. I'd tell you more about this show, but the mere existence of its central organization is firmly in spoiler territory, so here we are, I guess. It's seemingly been in a state of indefinite limbo for some time now, waiting for a slot in the schedule to open up, but there are regular assurances by various Star Trek heads that the show will happen. In fact, the show is directly set up by the events of Discovery's 3rd season, meaning the first 3 seasons of Discovery should be the show's only prerequisites.
It's important to know how you candidates deal with other cultures, other species.
Then it was a test?
Yes. Not all tests are announced, but they appear to be.
Editing Nathan again, with a very quick note. Again, since recording this footage and editing it right now, there's been an official announcement of Starfleet Academy, and essentially everything I'm about to say is still true. Just replace rampant speculation with all but confirmed. Star Trek Academy is an upcoming series with so little information, its memory alpha page doesn't exist yet. Which, given the fact I recently discovered the memory alpha page for Parking Brake, is astonishing. The show will, unsurprisingly, center around life at Starfleet Academy, probably through the eyes of various cadets. Firmly entering the realm of speculation, many have noticed that Discovery's 4th season has neatly set up a certain character to lead a show about the Academy around the time the show was announced. So many have speculated the show will take place concurrently or shortly after Discovery's later seasons. For our purposes, I think that's a safe assumption, especially as it's highly probable either Discovery's first 4 seasons will be a prerequisite, or nothing will. So if Academy sounds interesting to you, I'd recommend getting started with Discovery.
Nothing ever changes, except man. Your technical accomplishments? Improve a mechanical device and you may double productivity. But improve man, and you gain 1,000-fold. I am such a man.
Star Trek, Kahn, Ceti Alpha 5, is a recently announced scripted podcast miniseries centering around the life of Kahn Noonien Singh between the original series episode Space Seed and the movie The Wrath of Khan. While I may find the terminology unusual, this will be an audio-only series akin to the Big Finish Doctor Who stories or old radio dramas. While nothing else is known about the plot of this project, given the premise, it's pretty safe to say the only prerequisite will be the TOS episode Space Seed, which introduces the character of Kahn.
It's been a long road, getting from there to here.
72 episodes. To answer the question I posed last year, that's how long it took my first version of this video to become so outdated it needed to be revised. To be fair, those 72 episodes saw the premiere of 2 new series and announcement of 2 more. But it just goes to show how alive and active the Star Trek franchise currently is. You may not like all of it, but there's certainly a lot to love nowadays. And 873 episodes may seem like one hell of a backlog, but I encourage you to take your time and really enjoy what's there already. Because as someone who became a fan when this was a dead franchise, let me tell you, you're going to miss it once you get caught up. And besides, with such a healthy production for the past 7 years and a very long-term plan on Paramount's desk, I think it's safe to say the franchise will still be around, producing plenty of new episodes by the time you catch up. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time!